Welcome to The Growth Factor, a broadcast ministry of St. Mark Baptist Church. Today, as part of our family, you will experience the life-changing and spirit-nurturing Word of God. Please enjoy this time with us, where we're committed to helping you grow in knowledge, grow in faith, and grow in God. St. Mark Baptist Church, you grow here.
Welcome back to the Growth Factor podcast, a broadcast ministry of the St. Mark Baptist Church here in Little Rock, Arkansas. My name is Pastor John. I'm the Connections Pastor, and I'm joined by our senior pastor, Dr. Philip L. Pointer, Sr., and we've been walking you all through a series called Deep Waters, Deliverance and Duty. Up until now, we've been talking about your deliverance. Well, now we're about to shift over to the duty portion, because after you are delivered, after the people are delivered, God gives them a duty to obey him. And so we're going to walk through the first section of that, which is something you may know, may be familiar with, the 10 Commandments, but we're going to look at it a little differently. And we're going to help you out, help you understand the 10 Commandments in their context. So looking forward for you all joining us for this episode. It should be a good one. Pastor P, as good Baptist kids, and many kids have over time learned some version of the 10 Commandments, either through memory or through chastisement.
Yeah.
From parents, grandparents, like these were kind of the 10 rules and laws that many kids learn either in Sunday school or just learn just generally, that many Christian parents really tell us about, and in good conscience and good effort to do so. But what we're going to learn is that some of the interpretations of those might have been a little off, but in the spirit of helping you to understand that obeying God is better than anything else.
Yeah, what we really see in the 10 Commandments, not just in church settings, but in civic settings, in front of courthouses, displayed in some businesses, those kinds of things. The 10 Commandments intended to be, or some have intended it to be, or claim it to be, the basis of our system of law. And there's much disconnect between the reality of the American justice system and the proclamation of the 10 Commandments. But it permeates society in so many ways, and many of us know these as thou shalt nots and thou shalt not, thou shalt not. But there's something more significant than just a list of rules to keep. It's not just a list of rules to keep. The reality is God's restrictions are God's protections. God is not trying to keep us from something delightful. God is trying to keep us from something dangerous. And again, we talked about it in our last study, in our last episode, that the idea is that I gotta submit myself to know God knows better than me. And that's when I look at the things that God says to avoid or not do as acts of a loving God trying to keep me as a little baby from touching that hot stove.
And then if we view these prohibitions in that way, it really does take us, when we talk about literary context, it takes us to the Genesis account where Adam and Eve were able to enjoy so many good things. But they focused on the prohibition that led to the fall. And I think often when we hear the shall nots, we think about what God tells us not to do and forget the good things that he allows and that he calls for us to do for our joy and for our pleasure. And so it would behoove us of not to fall victim to what our parents, not our literal parents, but Adam and Eve fell victim to, by looking at these prohibitions and saying, wow, look at what God is keeping us from, but look at what God is leading us to. And toward. So we're going to look at chapter 20, but chapter 19 really sets the tone for this, because in chapter 19, God takes those first 4 verses to remind the people that he bought them out. Like, hey, I'm the God who brought y'all out of Egypt.
Yes.
Before I give y'all any prohibitions, I need y'all to remember that I'm your deliverer. And as deliverer, I should have the right to be able to give you all some type of things you need to obey as part of your deliverance, right? So he's saying to them, hey, your deliverance requires one thing of you. I just want you to obey me. And in obeying me, you'll get to know me better. You'll get to experience who I am more. And in that obedience, you'll understand that I'm still setting you apart as a people group. As you move forward through your national identity, that you're going to be separate from all these people groups, because these prohibitions really do demonstrate that you are worshiping the true and living God.
And Jesus is on every page of the Bible.
Yeah.
Where is Jesus in the Ten Commandments? Jesus is the one who perfectly, completely, without any wavering, fulfills each of these commandments. They really are a description of his nature as much as they are commandments or prohibitions. It is the Ten Commandments, and the 10 are essentially a initial summary of what ultimately will be throughout the first 5 books of the Bible, 613 or 619, 639 rather, commandments, depending on who you ask. So they're really in Old Testament law, there's really 613 or 639, depending on which school you ask. And the 10 commandments here are a summary. They're in brief, as it were,
which they expound upon, which leads to 613, which is why when Jesus in the Gospels, every time he gets encountered, they're like, "Hey, which school are you with?
Right? Who you with? Who you with?
Who you with? Are you with the 613 or 639? We need to know."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Just 2."
Yeah, I got it's 2. Which is, we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about that in a moment.
We'll tell you why he says it's 2, because it's very important. So God does have this one thing. He brings them through the wilderness to the wilderness of sin. He goes to Sinai. Here at the Sinai mountain, he leads them to the bottom of this mountain. And this is going to be the context for the rest of this book. As they are, so we got plenty of chapters we're going to spend in Sinai, at Mount Sinai. Yeah. And now he leads them to this mountain, and he tells them something, that he's going to descend in 3 days, and that no one is to touch the mountain. So he has a prohibition against touching the mountain. The mountain is now going to be wrapped in what? Smoke and thunder in chapter 19, verses 16 through 20. He wraps the mountain in smoke and thunder. And as an Israelite, as you're looking at this, you're like, man, this is scary. It's big scary. I mean, we've seen scary things from God before. Yeah. But now you're telling me if I touch this mountain, I'm going to die, and I'm seeing thunder and smoke appear. And so Moses now, at the end of chapter 19, is commanded to bring the priest up the mountain. And then that's where we're going to enter chapter 20 and talk about what God speaks to Moses on the mountain.
And so what's all this smoke about? What's all this thunder about? It is God simply demonstrating God's power and awesomeness, and putting Israel in a position to have a sense of reverence and awe. And man, I think, Pastor John, one of the things that one of the major areas of growth that we have as believers in this day is we seem to not have a great sense of awe of God.
Wow.
You know, your grandmama used to say when it was thundering and lightning, turn the lights off.
All of them off.
You know, but don't answer the phone. It was just, there was a sense of awe of God, just the power of God. The Lord is doing something. Be still, be quiet, and just let God do what God is doing. And we, those things we laugh at now, but there was a reverence. We'll talk about that more. There was a reverence they had for God in former generations. And while we got more information, and again, we talked about the last episode, more affluence, some of that reverence has been lost, and God is creating an atmosphere for that. And I think, when I think about it circumstantially and socially for us, it seems as if we kind of missed a moment, perhaps during COVID shutdowns and those kinds of things, as we see disasters in the world, those kinds of things. There should be for us an increased sense of awe of God.
Yeah.
Because God is not Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. He's the living God of the universe who transcends all time, matter, and space. And to be right with God is to enjoy God's loving presence and assurances. But for a world that rebels against God, there's something to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Which is what behooves us to believe on the cross and to run to that cross as our only hope for heaven, because otherwise it's going to be a terrible thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So what does that say for our efforts to manufacture smoke?
Ugh.
And we see it happen often, in church settings, worship settings, where God himself is the one who produces that. But it seems like there are times where we attempt to recreate or manufacture this smoke and this thunder that is supposed to lead to reverence for God, but it actually leads to some idolatrous practices in our own hearts.
Yeah. We begin to revere the experience more than the God who has granted it to us. And I think it's easy to get addicted to experience. It feels good when there's like something really present, or the gifts of the Spirit flow in such a way, the power of God moves in like a tangible way. If you ever experienced that, oh my goodness, it is an amazing experience.
Yeah.
But that's not the end all be all of. We can't judge. Oh, we had church today because people shouted and fell out or spoke in tongues, something like that. Because they have this experience of this smoke and this thunder, but that's not every day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There was a period where this was happening, where God was speaking to Moses, and then eventually there's going to be a day to move on from the mountain and keep on progressing. In the same way, Pastor John, you talk about manufacturing smoke, man. One of our great pet peeves is people who try to make a moment happen.
Listen to me.
Man, we gonna have a moment today. I know that much.
It happens all the time.
We gonna make this moment. You gonna fall out today. You better fall down. That kind of thing.
Sometimes I leave saying we had church and nobody shouted.
Oh yeah.
Because hearts were convicted.
Yeah.
People leave with this connection that they didn't have before, and nobody foamed at the mouth.
Yeah.
Nobody shouted.
Yeah.
None of that stuff happened. None of that stuff that you think is going to happen explicitly. It really has happened in people's hearts. And I'm like, man, we really experienced God today. And we don't need to put God in a box.
Right. Yeah.
Of course he appears here in smoke and thunder, but guess what? If you ask Elijah, well, I'm going to tell you how God showed up to me. Quiet, still voice. Yeah. After the thunder.
Yeah. He wasn't in the wind, fire, earthquake. None of that was God. He wasn't in it. God. None of that was God. Because sometimes you can have an experience, but that doesn't make it a divine one. I say all the time, people, when Michael Jackson was alive, people fell out at Michael Jackson concerts, man. You go back and look at some old footage of Teddy Pendergrass when he had them all-women concerts. They falling and shouting and foaming at the mouth just like we do on Sunday mornings. Luther could send you into a fit of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean God is there.
All encounters are not divine.
No, man. Luther hit that little
it's over. It's over for him.
Thank you.
They out.
Yeah, that wasn't God. That was Luther.
Yeah.
Luther Vandross.
So that's what we see. We see God appears here in thunder and smoke, but we certainly cannot limit him to that experience.
It's not only that.
Yeah. So let's talk about Exodus 20, and I think the shift verse actually happens right there in the beginning. Before you even get to the 10 Commandments, first couple of verses say these words. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Yeah. Before God gets to any commands, he tells them about the grace that they have experienced by his hand.
Yep.
You weren't worthy of it. You didn't do anything to deserve it. You didn't do anything for me to deliver you out of Egypt, I did it by my grace.
Yes.
And for my name's sake.
Yeah.
So what we see is, even with the 10 Commandments, I know people are always talking about, oh, look at all the prohibitions. But what we see is that grace has always preceded the law.
Every time.
From the beginning, God's grace has always showed up before he has this obedience that we have to obey him.
And it this principle, people want to pit the testaments against each other.
Yep.
Old covenant and new covenant, Old Testament and New Testament. But this is the exact principle, the very same principle that the Apostle Paul is going to employ when he exhorts the church at Rome in Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, the old King James says, by the mercies of God,
Yep.
that you present your body a living sacrifice. Obedience should always be done out of gratitude and reverence, never out of fear and the attempt to avoid something. You will not obey long if obedience is done out of mere fear, out of being scared. That won't last long. But when you are cognizant of the delivering work of God in your life, for those of us who are believers in Christ, that he has brought us out through his death, burial, and resurrection, then obedience becomes a matter of the issuing and flowing of gratitude from my heart. And now I want to please the God who has delivered me.
That's good. That's good. So we all know these as the 10 Commandments, but they're also known by another name called the Decalogue. And that comes from the Greek word deca and logos. So deca means 10 and logos means words. So literally it means 10 words, 10 words. And throughout this session, we're going to look at 10 words in Exodus 20 as we look at a law that is written to a freed people, but that law is written to show them how to stay free. Because as we mentioned before, you can be delivered out of Egypt, but you have to have Egypt delivered out of you.
It's about spiritual and social order. It is to prevent cultural chaos. I'm giving you these because when I take you into the promised land, I need to give you some standards to live by, so that you don't spoil or waste or mess up the big promise I'm giving you. And man, 2 or 3 of us know the testimony of God giving us something, and then we were reckless or disobedient to something we knew we weren't supposed to do, or something we did that.
Yes, sir.
And we made a mess of something that God blessed us with because we got the promise, but we did not have the constituent character to keep it and maintain it. Because it's one thing to attain, it's another thing to maintain.
That's good.
Yeah.
What we see with the 10 Commandments are 4 that are going to be vertically inclined, and then 6 that are going to be horizontal.
Yes.
So there are more horizontal commandments than there are vertical commandments.
Yes.
One of the things that really gets my goat is that folks always talk about, well, it's just about my relationship with God. I ain't got worried about people. Well,
actually,
if you look at the nimbus of the 10 Commandments, God saw fit to say, you know what? People created in my image are important enough to me in my economy that I'm going to make sure I have 6 commandments that help you have better relationships with those people. And I always tell people who always say, well, I'm just working on my vertical relationship. I said, you can't work on that one if you don't at the same time work on that horizontal relationship.
And this is the key. This is the critical key. And let's just put it in here, Pastor John, that what we're talking about in the 10 Commandments, Jesus crystallizes into 2, and they are vertical and horizontal. And according to Jesus, they have the exact same level of significance. Guy comes, Jesus says, hey, what's the greatest commandment? He says, the first one, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That is a encapsulation of the first 4. Then he says, and the second is just like it.
Yeah.
Same level of importance. Love your neighbor as yourself. That encapsulates the next 6. The 2 commandments that are New Testament, what we call the law of liberty, to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and 2, to love your neighbor as yourself, are summaries of the 10 with their intention of upward reverence and outward social responsibility. And that's what he died for, to ensure that we can vertically be made right with God. But then he leaves us a community called the church, so that we can live out in covenant community with one another and in society toward those on the outside. That's second commandment. And that's just as important. Just exactly as important as the first.
Yeah, he died to restore both your vertical relationship and your horizontal relationships.
Indeed.
It wasn't just to restore your relationship with God. He died to restore those horizontal relationships, and Paul talks about that.
And to give us redemptive horizontal relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. He says that he's given us this ministry of reconciliation. That the ministry that Paul talks about, that primary ministry he's given us, is to help people to reconcile with God, but also to help folks reconcile with one another.
And we can lean in on this in so many ways, but Jesus also demonstrates this on the cross. The Gospel of John says, as he's hanging there, he looks out and sees his mother, and he looks out and sees the disciple whom he loves, which is John. He says, "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." And from that moment, the Apostle John, the disciple John at that time, takes Jesus' mother into his house and cares for her for the remainder of her days. That, as he is hanging on the cross, he does something to deal with the horizontal issues that would be beneficial for both Mary and John.
That's so good.
Yeah.
And he did something to deal with vertical relationship for the thief.
Yes, indeed.
So it's almost like he's I'm handling her vertical and horizontal, hanging here on the cross.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So let's look at the 10 words here. First word we're going to see here is worship God alone. Now, what y'all need to remember is that these people, having been delivered from a polytheistic culture, now have a God who says, I need to recenter you all on me alone. Look at verse number 3. Do not have other gods besides me. That's it. He's saying, I am the Lord your God, verse 2, who brought you out of Egypt. That's that grace portion. But then he says, do not have other gods besides me.
Yep.
He's saying, first of all, I'm personal. I'm the Lord your God.
Yep.
We just went through all this polytheistic stuff.
Yep.
I did 10 plagues to address all them gods that y'all heard about in Egypt.
Yeah.
Now I'm telling y'all that I am your God, the Lord your God. And because of that reality, I need you to understand you cannot have any other gods before me.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to see how simply I can say this. When you look at the ancient world, it's much like ours in the sense that many of those cultures and nations believed in pluralism. So they didn't mind you having your God because that was your God. You know what I'm saying? So they were like, the nations that got together, Egyptians had their gods and Sumerians had their gods, and later Babylonians are going to have their gods and those kind of things. And everybody was cool with you have your gods. Now, sometimes they would have these little skirmishes and wars, and they would say, well, my God is stronger than my dad can beat up your dad kind of conversation. And so what this commandment is Israel, I am not a God. I'm not just your God while they have other gods. I'm the God. I'm the God. That's what I was proving in Egypt. And then God throughout Old Testament history is going to prove over and over again. He's going to prove it against Babylonian worship of Baal and Ashtoreth. He's going to do it over and over again with all varying Dagon, an idol of the Philistines. He's going to prove it over and over again. I'm not a God. I'm not just the Israelites' God, because they didn't mind you having your God. Nebuchadnezzar and them and Pharaoh and them, you got a God. Okay, good. Well, just worship your God over there, but my God is bigger and stronger. And he was like, no. I'm not one of the gods. I'm not just Israel's God. I'm the God. And that's what was so important about this first commandment. It is God asserting that he is alone. He alone is the only one who's divine, only one carrying supernatural power.
Yeah, and they're so used to, especially in the culture that they were in, of this gumbo of gods.
Yeah.
Just throw everything in the pot.
Yeah.
That they're all gods. And he's like, I am the whole meal.
Yeah. And Pastor John, you and I teach survey of world religions and do some advanced studying in religion with our undergrads. But one of the things I tell our undergrads, and this is not politically correct, but it's the truth. You insult true adherence to systems of faith when you try to lump all faiths together and say they're all the same.
Yep.
For people, that is a very privileged Western view of religion and systems of faith. Because Christianity is not the only faith that makes exclusive claims to be the only correct faith. And for those who practice ancient religions, whether indigenous or Eastern religions, Hindu, Confucianism, those kind of things, Buddhism, for those who practice Islam, to say they're all the same is an insult to them. And again, wanting to gumbo or goulash these different gods and take this piece that I like and that piece I like and put it all together and make, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. You are insulting all the people who adhere to these systems of faith. Then that's just the social reality. The spiritual reality is God is God. And God has chosen to reveal God's self in the scripture and through God's Son Jesus Christ and in nature. And those self-revelations, that uncovering of God, because we could not discover God, God had to reveal God's self to us. That results in the biblical faith that we teach and practice. We cannot be afraid. We cannot be ashamed. We cannot be scared to stand on what we believe and say, this is the God.
Yeah. And here's the thing that really blows my mind is that God sets the tone early here. That he is a God who says, all right, I understand that y'all come in a culture that says, I'm going to add you to everything else in my life. On top of everything else as this mix of everything. And he stands up and he says, hey, I'm not interested in being added into your lives. I really just want all of you. All of your lives. I'm not being added to any other gods. I don't want to be part of an idol factory. I want to destroy that. And I am the God that you need to worship. There is no other God besides me, he says here in the text.
And can I just put a little preach in it, Pastor John, and say, he's enough.
That's it.
That's all I'm trying to say. Good evening now, children. God bless your heart.
Have a good night.
Yeah, all I'm trying to say is that he's enough, that we don't need these extraneous and superfluous deities or practices. The God is far more than enough to rescue us and secure us for eternity, for peace of mind, for abiding joy, for abundant provision, for a sense of purpose and the revelation of our true identity as we know we're made in his image and then remade and are being made into the image of the Lord Jesus Christ. He's enough.
And once you find enough, not enough is insufficient.
I don't want to talk about this. My soul is getting happy. I'm telling you, I'm satisfied with him. He's enough. If you ever really connect with him, if you ever really, what your grandma would say was try him.
Yes, sir.
If you ever really try him, I promise you, he's enough to satisfy your soul.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's word one. Word two is avoid idols and images. We see that in verse number 4. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. So in the ancient Near East, worship was always connected to images. We talked about this before. They would make images out of everything.
Yeah.
Because I had to have something I can look at, touch, and feel in order for me to worship that thing.
Yeah.
But what we learn here about God in this text, and what we learn throughout the biblical witness, is that God himself is a spirit.
Yeah.
And has no physical form. We learn more about that in the New Testament in John 4, where Jesus is encountering this young lady at a well, and she wants to have a theological argument with Jesus.
Right. Hold on, Jesus.
Which one of these mountains y'all worship at? I want to know who you with again. Whose team are you on, right? In John chapter 4, this is the woman at the well, and they have a conversation. Jesus calls her out on her stuff.
Hey, yeah.
Go call your husband. And she's like, I haven't had one. He says, you have 5, and the one you with ain't even yours.
Yeah. And that is her being with this one who wasn't hers was a reaction to being rejected by the 5 in this day. As she could not divorce any of those men, they all divorced her. So she said, I'm just gonna get me one and leave it be.
And then she says to him, sir, I see that you are a prophet, because he told her about her life. Our fathers worship on this mountain, but you Jews say the place to worship is in Jerusalem. And he tells her, believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. Verse 24. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. So Jesus is saying location is not important when it comes to the God who's spirit. That this mountain that you are now idolizing, that has now become an image that God is talking about here in Exodus, that you are worshiping and saying, this is where we encounter God. This is where God is best encountered, at this mountain. And the Samaritans have experienced that for a long time. Jesus comes along and says, you know what? A God is spirit. And the folks who worship him are going to worship him in spirit and truth. And he reiterates what he told Nicodemus at night.
Yeah.
He talks about the spirit, and he talks about the spirit blowing wherever he wants to. That we cannot, again, as we mentioned earlier, we cannot limit God to a location. Yeah. And that God's a spirit, and he has to be worshipped in spirit and truth. Yeah.
In this second commandment, the prohibition of creating idols, it's literally don't carve out, don't carve a monkey and say that's God, or don't take a rock and say that's God, or anything like that. It is putting too much stock in the tangible. As opposed to the transcendent. Nothing tangible can contain or accurately really represent the transcendent. We've talked a couple times, and we've mentioned it on Sundays as well, the idea of speaking of God anthropomorphically. So the eyes of the Lord, the Bible says, are in every place, beholding the wicked and the good, the hands of God, I'm going to put my problems in God's hand, that kind of thing, falling down at the feet of God. Well, God doesn't technically have physical eyes, hands, and feet, other than in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. But the God who is transcendent, the only one God, is transcendent. There is nothing tangible. God exists outside of time, outside of space, and beyond matter, filling it all, but transcending it all as well. And so God is saying, don't try to put me in this little square or in this little rock or in this little carved image that you made, because to do so insults my true nature of transcendence.
And the irony in it all is that you and I, every human being, was created, as we learned in Genesis, in God's image.
Yeah.
And what we do, in essence, when we do that, is we turn around and we want to create him in the images that we want him to fall into.
Yeah.
We want to create him in our image.
Yeah.
And we want to become gods in that sense.
Yeah.
And we want to reverse
Yeah.
who he is
Yeah.
and become him
Yeah.
to him.
Yeah. I think about it all the time, that I don't know that many people struggle with physical idols, but we often struggle with idols as images and ideas in our minds. Some of us idolize being rich, or idolize being popular, or idolize being prosperous in whatever way, or something like that. Some of you, and I'm just gonna get in your business and talk about you and your mama. I don't care. But some of you idolize your fraternity, your sorority. You're more AKA than you are Jesus, or alpha than you are Jesus, and you idolize those letters and those colors, those kinds of things. We idolize those things. We create undue importance about them. Some people, and this just being exceedingly practical, we got to hurry, Pastor John. Time is running on us. But some people idolize their children, or the image of what they want their children to do or be.
Yes, sir.
And so you create these contexts where you put your kids in things you are interested in, but they are not. You want your kid to be an artist, and so you make them an artist, or you want the kid to be, you hoping they become the NFL player to buy you out the community. So you know what I mean? So you gonna make little man go to football practice. He kicking the daisies, and you know what I'm saying? Playing in the grass, and you mad at him because he's not interested in it. Those kinds of things are all idols. They insult the transcendent nature of God, because God may not want man to go to the Final Four at University of Arkansas. He might want man to go be a missionary in Botswana.
And we have to realize that is our natural disposition, and fight against that. Because when we deny it, that's when it makes it worse.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, my kid's not an idol, but you want him to go to basketball practice every day, and he hates basketball.
Yeah.
I tell people, listen, my son's he's gonna be 6'7". I'm pretty sure he's gonna be tall. He don't want to play no basketball, and I'm not gonna make him play basketball. Even though that was my childhood dream. Even though having the NBA player in the family would be great.
Listen, as long as he maintained his membership and paid his tithes at St. Mark. Now, listen, if he gonna pay his tithes, then I may have to get on that idol right there.
You may have to push him a little bit.
Are you sure, John? Are you sure?
But it's really easy for us to do that and fall into that. Like you said, we don't have carved images, but we do have people and things that we create in images. And you don't always need that physical thing for the spirit behind it to be able to invade your life.
I'm going to be really terrible. We have to move, Pastor John. Goodness gracious.
I know. I'm sorry.
Goodness. It's my fault. But, man, some people idolize or have made idols out of celebrity. Some of y'all are more beehive than Jesus hive. I've seen people on social media unfollow people because they talked about Nicki Minaj. Oh, how dare you talk about Nicki Minaj, and so I'm going to unfollow you. But you then tolerate all of their trash talk about the church and the preacher, and they ain't no good, and you let somebody talk about your mama and you laugh it off. But Lord, if they talk about Meg the Stallion, you ready to fight.
I got beat up real good when I talked about Will Smith. I know we got to go, but I got beat up real good about Slapgate.
Because we have made, and that you're not even, you don't love the person because you don't know them. You are worshiping an image, an idea of a person.
Who you think they are.
They have carefully crafted PR teams and hair and makeup. You don't know that person at all. They may not even like you.
Yep.
Their feet may stink. You don't know them. And yet you ready to defend them to the death. That's idol. You have created an idol. That's an image or an idea that you're replacing God with, and we need to stop it.
Man, idols and images could have been a whole episode.
I said, listen, we gonna let them in on these behind the scenes conversations.
Right. So we talked about idols and images. That's word number 2. Word number 3 is do not abuse God's name.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this one has been appropriated in different ways, but here's what it says. Okay, it says, do not misuse the name of the Lord. Verse 7.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. Ooh, scary. To hear that and to hear that being said. But we only hear about the blasphemy, like blaspheming God's name. And that includes, but this actually includes using God's name to promote one's own agenda. That when you do something, slap God's name on it, you're misusing his name in that context if you don't glorify him through what you're doing.
Something like the concept of Christian nationalism.
Pointer.
When the truth is you're not in any way exalting the Christ of the Bible, because the Christ of the Bible was on the side of the poor and the oppressed. The God of the Bible lifted up women. The Jesus scripture was the one who took the ones on the margins of society and centered them in his ministry. That's what Jesus did. But you're trying to control economics and education for the sake of maintaining power among a few at the expense of the many. And this is what this is talking about. It's not talking about, and I know what your grandmama told you. She meant she meant well. But it's not about you saying, "Oh my God," when you see something. If you see a tree fall on a car and you say, "Oh my God," you didn't use the Lord's name in vain. That's not what that's about. That's not what it means. It really, in its immediate context, had a lot to do with making oaths and swearing by God's name, those kinds of things. So promoting one's agenda or appropriating divine identity, but using it for human greed or human aspirations or for the sake of my own selfish motives, that's when you're using the name of the Lord in vain.
And those are instances where you misuse the name of God.
Yeah.
I don't think that we focus on that enough because those are things that folks are certainly going to be held accountable for in those instances. And Jesus mentions this in the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6. And he says this: therefore you should pray like this: Our Father in heaven, your name be honored as holy. So he's saying initially, Our Father who art in heaven, your name be honored as holy. And that is in what we say and in what we do. We cannot misuse the name of God and in fact break this commandment that many people just think saying, "Oh my God," is the commandment, but really it is that you misappropriate and misuse the name of God.
It is what the Apostle Paul will say in a positive way in Colossians chapter 3. Everything you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. So in positive ways, productive ways, helpful ways, God honoring ways, God glorifying ways, the name of Jesus, God's name, will be promoted, revered, and considered holy. The old King James is hallowed. That's the idea. To do the opposite is what this commandment is trying to prohibit us from.
That's good. So do not abuse the name of the Lord. And then word number 4 is remember the Sabbath. Verses 8 9 and 10. So remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Verse 8. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Now, one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that this Sabbath rest not only applied to the Israelites, but to everyone. I mean, it extended as far as the livestock.
Yep.
Even slaves had rights to a Sabbath rest. And then God concludes it by saying, well, here's why.
Yeah.
I created the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day, I myself rested. Now, I know we ain't got much time, but theological difficulty.
Yeah.
Because we have a God who never sleeps or slumbers.
Never sleeps, never slumbers.
But he rested.
It's different. We know practically that you can sleep and not rest.
That's it.
Those are not the same thing. You some of us know that physically. You go to sleep, but you get up just as tired as you were when you. What's the difference? Rest is restorative.
Yeah.
It's reflective. It's reverential. The idea of Sabbath was to stop and remember God, and again be in awe of what God has done. And that time and later, as this law, we talked about these laws were later clarified, expanded, and explained. Later, what we'll see in the law of Moses is it involved gathering with family. It involved meal time. It involved worship.
Yeah.
And in that way, remembering, being restored, reflecting is what made it rest, not just sleep. And that's, rest is worship. In the same way that work is worship, rest is worship. And what the law of God does is establish a healthy rhythm of rest. And ultimately, we're going to find this fulfilled in the person and work of the Lord Jesus Christ, who is our Sabbath rest. He himself is the rest that, according to the book of Hebrews, remains for the people of God. Yeah.
And that's what we really got to be careful of, because we live in a culture of busyness that wears it as a badge of honor. Like, people ask you, how you doing? Oh, man, got all this going on today. I'm so busy.
Yeah.
And it's like, look at me. I'm Superman or Superwoman.
Yeah.
Where Scripture commands us, really, it does say that we need to have this regular rhythm of rest in our lives.
Yeah. Jesus is clear in the Gospel of Matthew. Hey, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. You'll find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light. The soul that serves Jesus should find rest, even if at times the body does get weary. That can happen. But I believe, Pastor John, that it's both and, not either or. I believe we are to be in a regular rhythm of soul rest, and we are to be in a regular rhythm of physical rest as well. That is so that both are restorative. Our souls find rest in Jesus Christ, but our bodies need to find rest in some healthy, active hobby, in our corporate worship experience, whether in person or virtually, in time with our family and spouse or children, at times of some independent activity that I enjoy, or in times of just sitting in a recliner looking out the window and watching birds fly back and forth. God is worshipped in that. Not that that's what you sit up and do every day, unless you're retired. Then God bless you, God, and I envy you greatly.
Right.
But God is glorified in that regular rhythm of rest, both in our soul and for our body.
Yeah, and just kind of as an aside, the first century Jews really did take this to heart. I mean, they had rules and prohibitions against turning the stove on, turning off lights, and even answering the phone. I mean, we've seen it in our day too. Yeah. Like on Sundays, there were things that we just were not allowed to do.
If you go to Israel now, they have what they call Sabbath elevators in some hotels. So on the Sabbath, when the sun goes down on Friday, there's an elevator that stops on every floor. So you don't even have to push the button. When I was in 10th grade, I had my health teacher was named Mr. Levine, who was Jewish, and he began to tell us, he was also the drama, over the drama club. So Mr. Levine told us that there were rabbis who tore their toilet paper off on Thursday and Friday. So they didn't have to tear toilet paper off on the Sabbath.
Yeah, I mean, they went to those extremes to be able to honor the Sabbath.
That's a bit too far. And in the first century, Jesus has correct that and say, hey, the Sabbath was made for men, not men for the Sabbath. Yep. It's not a rule to restrict you. It is a commandment to provide you with rest.
That's good. All right, remember the Sabbath. And word number 5 is honor your parents. Now, this might be trouble. This might be trouble.
Hey, Mama, go
grab them kids.
Go get Ray and Nook and Sally Mae and Junebug.
Let them listen to this part, okay? Honor your father and your mother, verse 12, so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So he's saying here, honor your parents. And there's a connection, saying so that you may have long life in the land. I know, growing up hearing this verse, it was like, don't be disrespectful in your speech to parents. But that honor really goes farther than that. It really means that you're called to highly prize your parents, that you are to hold them out as a high prize in your life. And that may be trouble for some folks.
Yeah, it presents, the principle is abiding and universal. Its practice can be difficult. Parents are people. People are flawed. And sometimes, Pastor John, sometimes people are wicked. And some people have had to suffer through parents who were outright wicked. Tragically speaking, all of us have had to suffer through parents who had some weakness or flaw. And ideally, as we grow and mature, we begin to see and understand and give grace to them in their times when that flaw affected our upbringing. But there are some people there are some sorry mamas and daddies out there, and that's
truth.
That's painful. And for those of you who are having pain, let me remind you, you can always text the word talk to 501-299-9009. We have people who are professionals in the mental health space who can help minister to you as you try to work through that kind of experience. But we don't want to lack the acknowledgement of the fact that all parents aren't good, godly, holy parents. So what do I do if I don't have the good parent, if I don't have the godly parent, if my father comes back into my life as an adult and has no rhyme or reason to where he was or why he wasn't there? The honor here is not always proximity, those kinds of things. Ideally, you work on your heart to walk in forgiveness, grace. As we forgive, so are we forgiven. But it is to say whatever process was surrounding my conception and creation, God used that to get me here.
God was in it.
Yeah. God makes life. And so if I'm here, God was involved in whatever that process was. And so in some way, there is something to be grateful for and to esteem, even if the raising was difficult for you. And again, I want you to be honest with yourself. If you need the kind of help to process through that, please text TALK to 501-299-9009. But prayerfully, that's the exception and not the rule. Generally speaking, mamas and daddies are trying to do their best to raise their children, to provide for their children. And some had techniques and ideas and ways that are now out of vogue, unpopular. Oh, they were bad. Gentle parenting is in, and I have my own thoughts about that. God bless you.
Gentle
parenting is in. But whatever they did, however they did it, if they were trying to raise you, you ought to be grateful. If you ate pretty regularly, and if if they found a way to put a potato sack around you to go to school, to clothe you so you weren't naked as Jaybird, then I think that's something to highly prize.
Yeah. And there's an intergenerational component to this too. I know both of us work in the higher education setting, professors at Philander Smith College, and we teach Gen Z folks. And we have conversations all the time about the young folks. Yeah. So there's this intergenerational component, though, that appears here, that there's some honor. Even we're not technically parents, but there's certainly some parental role that we play with these folks who are outside of their own home environments. Like sometimes I do feel like Uncle so-and-so.
Oh, yeah, no. Especially at a HBCU, we do, and we do it as pastors. I joke with our parents around St. Mark who have our younger kids. I say, I don't even fool with you. I just want the kids. Just bring your only job is to bring my kids to me, that kind of thing. I am both the student and children's pastor. Really, I let Sipo and Mona assist me in that. But intergenerational tension is a reality because as time moves forward, as information becomes more prevalent, as we learn more things, it's easy to consider an older generation as less than, lighter than, slower, stupider. They didn't know about this. They didn't know about that. But I will say this, Pastor John, if you, in the words of our foreparents, if you just keep on living,
that's it.
Older people get smarter the older you get.
That's it.
I say all the time, my father's line to me was, when you have sons, you'll understand. When you have sons, you'll understand. He would say something, I'd be like, that don't make no sense.
I never understood it when they said it. But now.
But when you have sons of your own, you'll understand. And now having my two big-head boys, I say, oh, yeah.
You totally get it.
That makes all this.
And then you wait for that light bulb to go off. And it's like, it'll go off at some point, but they'll be long gone adults. And then they'll come back to you and say, maybe they'll say you were right.
Yeah, but we I don't want to move over the idea that this is what Paul is going to say in Ephesians is that this is the first commandment with promise attached to it. The other ones are just do it, kind of like because I said so.
That's it.
And this one says so that your days may be long. There is a health, self-preservation component to honor. My friend Dr. Danielle Brown says, if I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of honor.
That's good.
And it's always better to honor, to give deference and preference, even if they're wrong as two left shoes, that's fine. But it's always better to honor and give deference to the generations that have come before, because it's going to do something for you to honor them.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this briefly, but Jesus talks about this in Matthew 15 when talking about the traditions of the elders. He says, hey, you all know the command, honor your mother and your father. Whoever speaks evil of father and mother must be put to death. Matthew 15, verse number 5. But you say, whoever tells his father or mother, whatever benefit you might have received from me is a gift committed to the temple. So this is Jewish idea of korban, where they gave their parents this gift, and they said, well, you know what would be better? If we give what was meant for my parents to the temple.
Yep.
And that way we're serving God. And Jesus says in turn, in this way you have nullified the word of God because of your tradition.
Yep.
So they created this tradition that really nullified the word that said, hey, you still need to honor your parents. That, yes, the temple is important, but your parents and the livelihood of your parents are also important through this amount of money that you put aside called korban that you were taking care of them for.
And basically what they were doing was using it as a roundabout way to keep the money for themselves.
Right.
Rather than to take care of their aging parents. Yeah.
Honor your parents. So number 6 is do not murder. Okay. And we're going to find that in chapter 20. And literally the verse says, do not murder. So that's it.
Yes.
Straightforward. But murder in the Hebrew understanding is this taking of life without justification.
Yeah.
It was this idea that you were taking a life, you didn't have any justification. There were times where you could, and they're going to lay it out in the law a little bit later.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have justification, then it was considered murder.
Yeah.
Now, what happens post Old Covenant and when the New Covenant comes in, Jesus challenges us and every Christian in all of time. The Sermon on the Mount is probably the toughest sermon of all time to apply to your own life.
Yeah, it's a left hook to the liver. It's just body punch after body punch. And in this way, Jesus expands our understanding of this command to include how we think about and talk to one another. Once again,
say that again.
The horizontal. Murder is not just the actual taking of life, according to Jesus. Thinking about and talking to each other as to demean, diminish, or deny the image of God in them is akin to murder.
Yeesh.
Same thing to Jesus.
Matthew chapter 5.
Yeah, man.
Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 to 26. Listen to what Jesus says here in the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, this has been his discourse throughout the Sermon on the Mount. You heard this, but I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court. Whoever says you fool will be subject to hellfire. So if you're offering your gift on the altar and there you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled with your brother or sister. Then come and offer your gift. Whew.
I don't even want your offering.
That's what he said.
I don't act like we good vertically.
Again,
if you ain't tight with the folk around you horizontally. And what an amazing he's if you to be angry and angry unjustly or unduly angry is the idea. That's the same thing as murder. To insult your brother or sister,
right? Yeah,
is the same thing as murder. And to call them a rocker or fool, it's almost a curse, so to speak. Is the same thing as murder, according to Jesus. According to Jesus. Oh, they just need to toughen up. Well, tell that to Jesus.
So he expands this idea of murder that the Israelites and Jewish people would have known as he's on this mountain. And these folks, we know what murder is. Moses told us. We got the entire Old Testament to let us know, Hebrew Bible to let us know. Now you want to come along and tell me that if I'm angry or insult somebody, that's the same thing as murder.
Someone has commented, Pastor John, and said the prohibitions are inside out positive commands. If murder is the unjust taking of life, the idea is the positive command is you should be giving life,
Yeah.
not taking it away.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so word 6, do not murder. Word 7, do not commit adultery. Mm-mm. Oh boy.
Yikes.
That's word number 7.
Yeah.
In the 10 Commandments, do not commit adultery. And that's literally what it says in verse number 14.
Yeah.
Do not commit adultery. Now, this principle is really more about the importance of faithfulness within the context of a relationship than it is about being promiscuous outside of it.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people think about, oh yeah, he cheated on his wife. Well, actually, it's really about faithfulness, which really points to God's own faithfulness to his people.
Yeah.
And Jesus is going to expand on this. Paul's going to expand on this idea of marriage being a picture of Christ and his church.
Yes, sir.
And scary for a husband to think about this idea that he is to be in a relationship with his wife in a way that points other people to Christ.
Yeah.
And insofar as you don't as a husband, then you're falling short of the relational dynamic you need to bring people into the kingdom of God.
You are marring the picture. You're taking a red marker, a red Sharpie to the Mona Lisa. You're chipping away at the statue of David. God has created this wonderful picture of God's own faithfulness to God's people, Christ's love for the church, and unfaithfulness puts glasses and a mustache on a perfect portrait. It's like going into the White House and drawing a mustache on Barack Obama's portrait. You're marring the picture. I do want to say that, this idea of committing adultery, there are a couple of things, and we got to go, but there are a couple of things that people misunderstand. Some people try to say, well, this commandment doesn't apply because it was about property. Women were property in that day, and that has absolutely nothing to do
at all
with this at all. The other thing is, this is again about faithfulness that reflects the faithfulness of God, and the sex issue is incidental. Now, not that the sex issue is not an issue, it's an incidental issue. The issue is the heart and faithfulness that represents the faithfulness of God. Now, if we want to talk about sex stuff, because a lot of y'all are saying, I know that's right. Cheating. Listen, it's been a long time since I've taught this at St. Mark, but I need to say it in this on this occasion. If you're not married, like under God and legally, you can't cheat. You can't cheat without covenant. Now, you can lie to somebody. He may have lied to you. She may have lied to you and said, I'm only with you. It's just you and me. And then you found out they were with someone else. But that's a lot. Cheating is only in the context of marriage. That's letter one. Number B is, it's just as wrong. Listen, lean in, sis. It's just as wrong for you to have multiple people unmarried as it is for someone to have another person in marriage.
Oh.
So these are you understand what I'm saying? That's just as wrong. It's also just as wrong for you and your committed person outside of marriage to be trying to play married sexually. If y'all are committed to each other, then just get married. So the sex discussion is incidental. This is about faithfulness that represents the faithfulness of God. And in that way, Pastor John, it extends outside of just mere physical contact. That's what I'm trying to get to. That it's about more than just physical contact. And Jesus is going to amplify this again in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But if you look at another one with lust in your heart,
you've committed adultery.
So not noticing the attraction, because somebody's fine, they fine. You're going to notice the attraction. You're going to be attracted. But to let those thoughts linger and fester and fantasize is to do the same thing as to do something physical, according to Jesus. That's what Jesus said.
And so that's what this is really about. It's really about unfaithfulness. And what that shows is that unfaithfulness is really a harbinger of unfaithfulness in other relationships.
Absolutely.
Like relationship with your money, relationship with God. Someone who has been unfaithful in their marriage, sometimes, well, more often than not, their relationship with God suffers. Relationship in other areas suffer because they know they've done something that was wrong. So this idea of not committing adultery isn't really about the sexual act. It really is about committed faithfulness to the covenant that you have made with another person.
Indeed. It is a matter of the heart.
Yeah. All right. Do not steal is the next one. That's verse number 15. This principle addresses the human propensity towards greed. And here's the thing about stealing, okay? It's not just you walking in a store, taking something and being criminally liable for it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
There are instances where, as a Christian employee, if you're in an employee context, where you clocking in and you stealing time from your employer, and you feel like you deserve it. I deserve this time.
Clock in and go back to sleep in your car. Clock in and go get breakfast from McDonald's.
I'm working remote.
Yeah.
And you ain't remote. You got the remote control and you binge watching. That's what you're doing.
Netflix. Yeah.
So even in that instance, God is saying, hey, I'm expecting my people, and it's not just stealing in the sense of it being legal, because you might not get caught, but it is still stealing.
Yeah.
When it comes to getting a bigger paycheck.
Right.
What the cost on the other side of that paycheck spiritually is probably going to outweigh that little change that you're going to be getting in the bank on the other side of that.
Indeed. It also, on the other side, to be unfair.
That's good. Yeah.
In what you pay someone for their work. Unfair wages, according to the book of Proverbs, is an abomination to the Lord. Unfair scales, to cheat someone out of, and man, I know in industries where sales and numbers and quotas are present and prevalent, that it can be very tempting to try to get the numbers where they need to be at the expense of the people that you are doing business with. But that is stealing. It's stealing to claim somebody on your taxes that you're not really taking care of. It's stealing. It's stealing. Identity theft is stealing. Being a scam. Why do y'all want scammers? When did the scammer become like an NBA player and an NFL player? I'm gonna get me a scammer. He's a thief, baby girl. He gonna steal your social security number next. It's all.
And
it's
then
all
call
scam.
It hustling.
Yeah. I need somebody that's gonna hustle. You gonna get 2 good dinners out of them, and then when he can't find nobody, he gonna go through your purse and get your cards and all of that kind of thing. So it is an affront to God. And here's what stealing does: it offends God's capacity to provide and bless. Yeah. It says God has not made enough. Years ago, I wish I could remember who said it. I heard a preacher say, God has enough to go around, and if God ever ran out, he could just make some more.
That's it.
I don't have to take what's yours because God has enough for me.
Do not steal.
Don't steal.
That certainly is one of the words that we see here. And then word number 9 is do not bear false witness. Verse 16, do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Now, in this culture and context, in order to have somebody tried and convicted, you had to have at least a couple witnesses against them.
2 or 3 witnesses.
So, and that's why we see that in the New Testament where it talks about the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So this is a cultural phenomenon. It says, hey, do not bear false testimony against your neighbor, because when you do, they'll be falsely tried and convicted of something that they didn't do.
Yes.
Central part.
Yeah.
So what we see here in this principle is that it actually includes stuff like gossip
Yep.
and slander
Yep. Proverbs is going to deal with that extensively.
and other false claims that we make about other people. So it's not just us standing up in court providing testimony against folks.
Right.
It really does include the stuff that you say in your office with the door closed, or via email or via text.
In the group chat.
Yeah, those items
Yep.
are items where you're bearing false witness against another person, and God says and God prohibits that here in the commandments.
This is one of the foundations of our legal prohibition against hearsay,
Yep.
and why there's such stiff penalties for perjury in our legal system. Listen to me. Repeating a lie is the same thing as making the lie up. Ooh, Pastor P. Yeah, I know
That's
it.
good.
Put that in the chat.
He said, put that in the chat.
Repeating a lie is the same thing as making the lie up yourself. You are doing just as much damage to the listener and to the individual that the lie is about as the person who made it up in the first place. This is why gossip is so dangerous. This is why we are prohibited from engaging in it. This is why if I don't know it about you, I'm not going to spread it about you, because you make me the liar. I am as guilty as the liar. I am an accessory to lie when I spread things that I don't. And this is, listen, Jesus was convicted
That's it.
because of false witnesses.
Yep. And if I repeat the same thing, what is it that I'm doing?
Yeah.
So that's what we see. We see that careless words, because those were careless words that were spoken about him that led to his death. But careless words do have lasting consequences. We see this in the book of James.
Yeah.
We preached through this book this year, and we talked about the tongue because James talks about the tongue in chapter number 3.
Yeah.
And he says this in chapter number 3, verse number 7: every kind of animal, bird, reptile, and fish is tamed and has been tamed by humankind, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with that same tongue we curse people who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way.
Yeah.
And then he compares it to the spring. He's like, how is it that two things come out the same mouth?
Yeah. Yeah. Bitter and sweet water shouldn't be coming out the same spring. Jesus talks about it this is why we need to be careful. Matthew 12, just write it down. Matthew 12, 33 through 37. Jesus talks about how we will be judged for every idle word. Listen to me. What kind of ridiculousness? Consider this. You miss heavenly reward, because you just got to get the tea. Can you how ridiculous would that be? That you just needing to hear what's latest, you tuning in on people's Facebook lives to hear the news and the latest, and your addiction to these gossip sites and making people rich and famous for being gossipers. We have made celebrities out of gossipers and liars. There's an entire industry around it. And you get to heaven and you didn't even say it. You just reposted it.
Right.
But you spreading it makes you the liar.
And then to take that analogy to its end, all that tea is going to do is run through you.
That's carry me home, Jesus. Come get me, Lord. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go, Jesus. Take me home.
That's all it's going to do.
John has taken me.
No eternal rewards. It's all going to run through you.
Run through you, Doc. That's the truth.
It's the God honest truth.
Lord have mercy. You talking right, Reverend. You talking right. We're going to raise John an offering after this one.
All right, let's talk about this last word. Let's talk about this last word. Word number 10 is do not covet. Do not covet. Do not covet your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Now, the word covet here literally means pant after. I'm panting after what you have.
Yeah.
Whether it be your spouse, whether it be your possessions. Obviously, we don't have oxen, not at least most people. But we do have possessions that people can be jealous of, be envious of, and we can be the same way.
Yeah.
Especially in this social media age where we're seeing people that have stuff, and we say, "I got to have that."
And it's not, again. Now the idea of covetousness is not an actual action. It's a disposition of the heart. Yeah. It's wanting and craving it for yourself. You ain't got to say nothing to anybody or do anything. You don't have to go knock them over the head and take their purse. That's not coveting. That's not covetousness. Covetousness is just wanting it, and you can't, not something like you have, but that I want what you have. I don't want a car like yours. I want your car. That kind of thing. I don't want a business like yours. I should be. I don't want to promote. It should be mine. That's the idea of covetousness, and it's a heart issue. It's not always an outward action.
So there's nothing wrong with somebody looking at a godly relationship and saying, "Hey, I want that kind of relationship."
Envy is perverted admiration. To admire something or someone is healthy and good, and then you can be influenced positively by either their process and, hey, how did you get there, or what did you do, and can you help me, or just faith saying, God, I see you doing it for others. I believe you can do it for me. That's positive. That's admiration. But envy is that perverted admiration.
Yeah,
it's when admiration goes to the dark side of the force, and you begin to crave and covet that which belongs to someone else, that which God has blessed someone else with.
Let's close and look at this antidote. I think this would be a good verse for us to be able to close on.
Indeed.
Because it shows us what the antidote to this covetous type of behavior looks like. And it's found in Hebrews chapter 13. And he starts by talking about brotherly love and letting it continue. He talks about hospitality, and he says, in doing so, when you're hospitable to people, some of you may have entertained angels without knowing it.
Didn't even know.
Without knowing it. Goes on to tell us to remember people who are in prison.
Yep.
Ooh, that's a whole movement right there.
Yes, sir.
But look at verse number 5. It says, keep your life free from the love of money. Don't covet money. Be satisfied with what you have, for he himself has said, and this is the experience in the book of Exodus, cloud, fire, I will never leave you or abandon you. Therefore, we may boldly say, because of that truth, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? So the antidote to covetous behavior is very simple. It's contentment. Being content with what God has given to you, knowing that he's a God who has promised that I'll never leave you or abandon you.
Yeah.
Which leads us to say, the Lord is indeed my helper.
Pastor John, the amazing context of that we love to say, I'll never leave you or forsake you, never leave you or forsake you, never leave you or forsake you, never leave you or forsake you. The context for that is money. Do you see it?
No.
It's look, keep your life free from the love of money, be satisfied with what you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you. This is because humankind, our seemingly greatest proclivity, and I'm generalizing, is to be worried about or concerned about much of the evil in the world is perpetuated because of money. Oppression, the brokenness of our government, money. Our prison industrial complex, money. Enslaving people, money. And if you have a right view of God's provision, it will be because you have a right view of God's presence. Because God is with me, I don't have to love money and be beholden to things and possessions and those kinds of things. I can actively live with full contentment to deliver me from covetousness. I ain't gotta want nothing you got, because I got God.
So 10 words, 10 challenges for each and every one of us to live out our duty as a result of our deliverance. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growth Factor podcast, the broadcast ministry of the St. Mark Baptist Church here in Little Rock, Arkansas. We had a good time in this episode, and we do hope that you will not look at these 10 commandments in the same way after hearing this session, and know that despite all these prohibitions, that grace always precedes our sanctification. So I want to make sure you all are aware of that. Also, we teach this on Wednesdays, but we also preach it on Sundays. So I want to invite you all to tune in on Sundays with us as we're working through Exodus in a series on Sundays. You can go over to smart.org and check out our live broadcasts on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock on our online church campus. Speaking of our online church campus, it is on Facebook. We have an online campus called The Growth Factor. And the podcast participants all are in there. We have a bunch of people in there who are being shepherded by our online campus pastor, Pastor Crystal. I want to make sure you join that and are engaged in that community. Every day we're giving you all content to help you grow and continue to grow. I want to make sure you follow the podcast, share the podcast. We're grateful for you all for tuning in this season as we're working through the book of Exodus and talking about deep waters, our deliverance, and then our duty after deliverance. We'll see you all next go round. Go home and think about these 10 commandments. See y'all next time. Peace.
Bye.
This has been The Growth Factor, a broadcast ministry of St. Mark Baptist Church. Be sure to follow this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and join our Facebook group, The Growth Factor, for daily motivational content. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for listening.